If somebody asks you how you are, what do you likely say? You may say fine. Many people say busy. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'm busy, and maybe you are too. How's that working for you? The amount of activity that we do doesn't necessarily correlate with the state of our souls. That's what this episode of our program is addressing. What's the state on the inside? Are you pressed, rushed, overwhelmed on the inside, regardless of your schedule? My guest on the program today, Alan Fadling, is president and founder of Unhurried Living in Mission Viejo, California. This organization and Alan's ministry and career helps inspire people to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. He's an author of 3 books, An Unhurried Life, An Unhurried Leader, and most recently, releasing now, A Year of Slowing Down, Daily Devotions for Unhurried Living. Now, when you hear unhurried living, you may think, oh, this is just going to be a list of the things I need to stop doing. I'm just going to be told to, chill. That's not what this is about. And I would encourage you to listen to this conversation because there's more yes than no. This is a call to something that is good and rich. It's not just about stopping doing things. It's a way of life that brings goodness. I'll let Alan talk a bit more about that in our conversation. So, Alan Fadling. Alan Fadling, what a great joy to have you on our program today. Just in the few minutes we've spoken already, you have blessed my soul, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
You are very welcome. It's so good to be with you.
I so enjoyed talking to Jim, your wife, a little while ago. We had her on the podcast. It's an honor to have you. I'd just like to start with a couple moments about the organization that you've headed, your wife is a part of too, Unhurried Living. I think so many of us today have heard the idea that, you should slow down. I think we all feel stressed, but that you have made something really beautiful that I think we all need to understand in just that part of life and following Jesus. Just take a minute and talk about that whole foundation and paradigm.
Yeah. Well, so whenever we talk about hurry, it seems like just about everybody resonates with it as a problem.
Yeah.
But it's a challenging problem because sometimes, when you ask a person how they are, they might say fine, which is a way of saying, I'm not sure I want to talk about it.
Right.
But another common word they use to answer a question like that is busy.
Yep.
And it's kind of half complaint, half boast. It's like, I don't like being this hurried. I don't like being this busy, but gosh, it makes me feel pretty important. And I think lots of people need me. That's probably really critical. I can't lose that.
Yep.
So when we talk about unhurried, we're not talking about the pace of your driving or the pace of your walking or even the fullness of your calendar. We're talking about soul. And I think we all identify with, being a little less hurried on the inside would probably help us in more ways than we realize. And so when we say unhurried, we mean that we really do have enough time for everything God has given us to do, to be, to enjoy. And then the last thing maybe I'll say is I really see this language of unhurried as a beautiful word to describe the way of Jesus. He has enough time, even when the crowds get huge, to go away to a lonely place and pray. He has time to stop for the person on the side of the road when everybody else has momentum going for the next place they're arriving to. He just has this different way about him, and I like the word unhurried to describe that way.
It occurs to me as you describe that Jesus we never hear about him being hurried, and he truly had the biggest job of all. He truly had the weight of the world on his shoulders and never hurried.
Yeah. Isn't that true? I think that's a good thing for us to hear. and to remember. I think in some cases, my hurry is a way of thinking I'm almost more important than Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus can stop and withdraw to a lonely place to pray, even though, as you say, he's got the most important job there is. And sometimes I've imagined I don't have time for that.
Yes.
Maybe I would do well to watch what Jesus does have time for and consider the possibility I might be invited to have that kind of time too.
I'd love just as you described that. Um, in living this life and in helping leaders and individuals find this unhurried life, you, Alan, you are not unproductive.
Yeah.
You've written books. We're going to talk about your third book here in a minute. You lead an organization, you do coaching, you work with leaders. There's a lot of accomplishment that you as a person and the
Yeah.
organization you lead do. But just as I'm talking with you, you don't come across as somebody who's hurried.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad. I've been in recovery for a while, I have to say. Um, but I remember something Dallas Willard used to say, and it was that idea that you can work hard without working hurried. Um, I think Jesus had days, you can read the Gospels, that were just absolutely packed
Yes.
with needs from the crowd, and they were profoundly productive if you want to use that ruler to measure his
Yeah.
life. Um, that's why I say I always feel like, especially the fall, for example, that we happen to find ourselves in
Mhm.
coming to the close of, it's often a very busy season for me
Yeah.
for a number of reasons. And so I always find myself leaning into what it would look like to have a full schedule and a relaxed soul, an unhurried
Wow.
soul. And
Wow.
I just think what I've found is it is more productive, not less. Productivity isn't just a math problem,
Mhm.
pluses and minus. Um, Productivity it's multiplying. And when I step back to rest, when I step back to pray, when I make spaces for solitude, for silence, I'm not taking away from the fruitfulness of my life. In fact, I'm tending the soil of my life, and I just find it bears better fruit then.
Mm. In my own life, you make me think of how I have, frankly, had to learn and have learned and incorporate a Sabbath in my week. And
Mm,
I find that the following day, my and it's not that the time with God and the beauty and joy and celebration and taking in and breathing in of Sabbath isn't worth it in itself. But when
yeah.
we talk about productivity, the next day, my mind, my creativity, just all that I have to bring is just like renewed, and the flow is just so great because
Yeah.
I have devoted that time to the rhythm that God designed.
That's exactly right. I've sometimes joked that I can get more done in 6 days than I can in seven.
Isn't
And
that the principle with God?
yeah,
Tithing, he does more with 9/10 of our money than with 10.
yeah.
Same thing with time.
I think that's true. And so, and of course, we're not saying that Sabbath is utilitarian. That's not our point, not
Yeah.
yours or mine. But the fact is, when I live in the way that God designed things, creation, the Sabbath was not first a law or a rule or something to
Yes.
legalistically follow. It was first a gift of creation. And when I live in the spirit of that, when that is the rhythm of my living,
Yeah.
things go better.
We've kind of alluded to this, but I'd like you to comment. When people hear slowing down, they
Yeah.
often hear things of, no, stop doing this. That there is a big part of your life and your message of what are you saying yes to? Just
Yeah.
help us explicitly understand a bit of the yes we are saying, what we are saying yes to with this kind of life.
Right. So one of the metaphors I love to use is the metaphor of breathing. And if you decided that you were going to start an approach to breathing that involved it only exhaling. From now on, I'm only going to exhale. That will not last long.
No.
It's silly. It's ridiculous. And so breathing works better when there's inhale and there's exhale.
Yeah.
Life works better when there's engagement and disengagement, when there is work and there is prayer, when there is activity and there is receptivity.
Mhm.
And so the yeses that I think we need to learn to say as leaders, not only are we saying yes to the good and well-fitting yoke Jesus has invited us into, but we're also saying yes to those moments when Jesus, like he did with his first disciples, said, come away with me to a quiet
Yes.
place and find
Yes.
some rest. Or when he is that good shepherd who, like the psalmist says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Mm.
He leads me, right? Green pastures, quiet waters. I just think sometimes leaders think the only thing God's inviting us to is work.
Yeah.
But I think God is also inviting us to rest, and that is a yes. We're invited to say.
Mm. I like that. I like that. Your recent book that's just out now, and I am so pleased about this. A Year of Slowing Down: Daily Devotions for Unhurried Living.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that and how this can help us um, walk into this kind of life.
Right. Well, thank you. So my first book was titled An Unhurried Life. A few years later, I wrote a book, An Unhurried Leader, and those really unpack some of the ideas, the big ideas, the theories, the way of living that
Yeah.
I'm talking about. But I'd always had in my mind a sense of wanting to write something that was a little bit more formational, like in by design. And so the format of a devotional has that possibility. It has that
Yeah.
potential. And so this book, A Year of Slowing Down, is really a 1 year devotional. It's 6 days per week. And I've written it, every single day doesn't talk about hurry, but
Yes.
every single day talks about this way of living, this unhurried way, and some of the fruit of it, or some of the practices that help. And so I've been very intentional about writing it that in that way. And there are questions, the kind of questions I hope that readers will lean into. And if they will, over the course of a year, I think they'll be on quite a formational journey.
Yeah. I appreciate this in part, just knowing a little bit about what neurobiology has discovered in recent years, the last decade or two, that simply stuffing a lot more facts into our intellectual left brain doesn't do
Yeah,
much for formation. We
right.
need the experience, the presence, almost the emotional part of us along with it, and
Yeah,
this helps us do that.
exactly. So, for example, when I write the questions for each of these days, they are rarely informational questions, although
Yes.
those are important. That's fine. Getting our information right is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
uh, but they are usually more likely to be questions of feeling or questions that challenge the imagination. What would it look like if, something
Mm.
like that? And I think over time, little by little, we begin to reimagine this life into which God's called us.
Yeah.
We call into question maybe some of the narratives that we've sort of held in the back of our head without even realizing it. Narratives about a God who may be less gracious and more harsh, more
Yes.
demanding. All of
Yes.
these things, little by little by little. That's how formation works. It's slow by design in a good way. It's small changes. It's not radical heroic changes. And that's really good because that kind of small and simple and slow and gracious change will tend to stick.
You've just described something that I think even many Christians forget about formation. We want the pill, even in our Christian life. We
Yeah.
want one prayer, one thing for God to zap us from here to there. We want to hurry our spiritual
Yeah.
formation. And God says, no, that's not how I work.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That we're there's many ways I could go with this, but I think simply put, having a formational vision of our life, this invitation to be transformed. It's not, as you say, it's not a snap, bang, here it is. Now I'm radically different today than I was yesterday. Of course, God does miraculous things.
Yes,
Of
yes.
course, there are moments that are radically transforming. But most of formation happens just like it does in creation. You plant a seed, you water it, you keep watering it,
Yeah.
you pull those weeds, you give it time, not just days or hours. It's weeks and months. If you planted an oak, an acorn, you're talking decades. But
Exactly.
that's good news. If your goal is to have an oak tree, give yourself some time.
Yes. Yes. Um, could I be so bold, Alan, as to just ask you to unpack maybe a couple of your own spiritual formation practices? What does this life look like for Alan Fadling 24/7?
Yeah, there have been a few practices that have been really important ones. One that's been a little more recent is it has struck me how often our praying can be just a cognitive exercise.
Yes.
And so I've just found myself being drawn to the physical language of prayer in the Psalms.
Mhm.
You're kneeling or you're standing or you're lying on the ground or you're raising your hands or you're giving a shout. And so little by little here recently, I've been finding ways to pray that don't just involve my thoughts or
Mhm.
some words I say with my mouth, but actually enacting these practices. And there's something about embodied
Yes.
prayer that actually helps us with this process of change. And like I said, it's modeled for us in the language of our prayer book, the Psalms.
Yes.
So that's been one really important one. One that's a little bit more, I don't know. Well, it's been a practice for well over 30 years for my wife and I both. And that is following Jesus to that lonely place to pray.
Hmm.
Some have called it the practice of solitude, silence, and prayer.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more, it's a little more occasional. Maybe it's a few hours or a chunk of a day. My wife and I try sometimes to set aside 24 hours. We can arrange our schedule to do that.
Hmm.
But the point is to really set aside time, maybe Sabbath like, to be far more in a receptive mode than an active mode.
Yeah.
And we find that when we do that, those are our most creative seasons.
Yes.
They are the seasons where we see our life and our work more clearly than any other time. Some of my best ideas have come in those moments. Some decisions that I had been wrestling with have come clear in those moments, but mostly a sense that my life as a life lived in God has come into focus
Yeah.
and continued. So I know those two have been really important practices. One a little more recent, one that's
Yeah.
been pretty long standing.
I really appreciate you talking about the embodiment of who we are as humans in prayer. I
Yeah.
have found myself recently not infrequently pacing, not as a anxious thing, but just moving, walking, whether it's on my
Yeah.
back porch outside or sometimes walking. And my conversation with God is much less asking for things at those
Yeah.
moments. It's
Yep.
much more presence. And I find as my body is moving, my right brain is more often present with just
Mm,
more than just the intellect. So all of me is a little more integrated when I bring my body to it also.
yeah. Well, isn't it just a way for us to obey the most basic command there is? We're told to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, but also strength. That's
Yes.
the implication. There's the physicality of who God's made us. And so learning how to pray with everything God's given us,
Mhm.
letting every part of who we are come into the presence of God, engage in communion with God, that's good for us.
Yes. Mm. Love it. I'd just like to ask you about a couple particular pieces in a year a year of slowing down that I
Yeah, sure.
noticed as I was looking at this. One was from day 6, and
Okay.
you bring this together with a story about your boys. The scripture you use that day: teach them His decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. And you share a little story about what that meant with you and your children, and I found that just very enlightening and encouraging.
Yeah, if I remember that day, the spirit of it was maybe a habit a lot of us as parents have, which is to tell our kids what they
Yep.
should do.
Yep.
It's always so very helpful, and they just latch on to that. But that language of train them, teach them how,
Yes.
show them how. And so what I remember was my dad lectures were not proving very fruitful. Yeah. Shockingly, they were
Yeah.
not just being transformed, magically with my intelligent, thoughtful statements as dad.
Yep.
But when I showed, for example, my oldest son a way that he could care for his younger brother. Well, at first, again, he wasn't too thrilled with that either. But as I watched for ways to affirm him doing something good, that he lit up like he'd already done something good, like somehow he'd done something kind for his younger brother. And just as I discovered, being able to affirm the good that maybe they just sort of instinctually do, or maybe they've heard or seen and they try it on, that brought our sons alive over time. So we learned that showing them by our own behavior,
Yes.
by our own way of relating to them, showing them how this good life works. That was a much better strategy than dad lectures.
Yeah. Applying these principles to every area of life, in this case, parenting. Yeah, I mean, God lectures to us don't seem to do very much. I mean, we need that information, as we said, but
Yeah.
much more the practice, the showing, the demonstration. I love that application. Another one that I noted and wanted to comment on was day 141. Jesus with the loaves and fishes. This is
Yeah.
actually a story, a passage that has meant a lot to me personally, with that place where Jesus says, and I can't remember which gospel right now, he says it, where the disciples, they see all the hungry people and they come to Jesus and say, these people need food. And Jesus says, you give them something to eat. In
Yeah.
my own ministry journey, I have often wrestled with, well, what do I have to give all these people? All these people that, God has here for me to help. I don't have anything. Um,
Yeah.
and that angst and that stress and the feeling of hurry is right there. And that's not the way of Jesus. And how the people were fed wasn't because of the disciples' angst. Maybe you can unpack that just a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think there's all kinds of leaders, Peter-like leaders who are very brash and confident. And
Yeah.
they run out there. I am more of a Timothy-like leader. I've needed a Paul to remind me that God's spirit is not a spirit of timidity or fear. And so it's good for me that gospel story to realize that Jesus can take the little
Mm-hmm.
something that this boy brings. And there were probably a lot of boys, and girls for that matter, in the crowd with their little
Yes.
lunch. I'm sure there were many of them. One of them came and brought it to Jesus, and
Wow.
Jesus turned that into what would bless thousands. And I've just thought, sometimes I feel like all I have is a little bit, a couple of fish and some bread, and gosh, this can't do much. But that's not the point. It's not about me and my
Yes.
what feel like sometimes meager offerings. It's about a God who is remarkably gracious, longs to be gracious, delights to be merciful, and would be glad to multiply my little offering in a way that would bless many. The
Mm.
good news about that is then, it's not going to puff up my head.
Yeah.
I didn't pay for 5,000 lunches.
Yep.
I just brought the little I had, and God did what God does.
Yeah. Mm. Beautiful. Um, well, as we kind of head toward closing here, um, Alan, just invite people to Unhurried Living, to this book and the others, and we'll make sure we have links in the show notes if you're listening, or under this video if you're watching. But just how can people find help to enter this kind of life?
Yeah. Well, we would love to be of service to any who happen to be listening. You can find us on the web at unhurriedliving.com. We have a number of resources that we offer at no cost. There's a weekly, midweek email. My wife or I write those, and they're just words of encouragement. We both have a podcast. ourselves, and I often am having conversation with fellow authors. Jim is often sharing words of encouragement to women of influence. So you can find information about those on our website as well. But I think what I'd say is this book, I've really written this book, the one that's just coming out,
Yes.
um, as a hoped for invitation to embark on a journey. That's the language of a year of slowing down.
Great.
And my hope is that you'll taste and see the goodness of this kingdom way of living that we've been enjoying, that we've been growing in, and that maybe you'll be able to join us in that journey.
Mm. And it occurs to me as you say that, with all we've talked about spiritual formation in this conversation, that a day or two doesn't do it. Although God can do things in a day or two, but just encouraging people to uh, be on the road, do the journey, make this a lifestyle. And what a great resource to help people make this a lifestyle.
That's our hope. If your dentist doesn't want you to brush your teeth once or floss once, basically they're saying you got to do that pretty much every day.
Yeah.
If we're going to exercise, one big marathon, will kill us, but a daily walk or whatever, that will form us.
Yeah.
And that is just how God made things. It's good for us to develop holy, healthy, wholesome habits.
Yeah. One last question, Alan. What would you say to somebody who maybe they've tried this before, or maybe they get this book and try it, and a few days or a few weeks in, just they suddenly realize they haven't been following this way and they feel like they've fallen down? Just maybe a moment of encouragement for somebody in that situation.
Yep. Well, what I would say to someone who has that awareness or awakening, that is a wonderful gift. Now, you may not feel great about it. That's okay. But today is the day of salvation. It's not yesterday. It's not tomorrow. It's today. And this is the day to take a new step. The perfect place to start your journey into following this invitation is now and here. There's no better place than it. And you're feeling embarrassed or ashamed or guilt doesn't do anything for anybody. It doesn't help you. God's not asking for that. God's just thrilled that you're returning, you're coming, you're embarking in a next phase of this journey. So find yourself in the grace and the mercy and the peace of God, and just take a little step.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you, Alan. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Again, if you're watching, check the links. We'll have all the links under this video. If you're listening, check the show notes. It has been a delight. Many blessings to you, Alan. And I feel like you and I need to stay connected.
Well, I feel the same. It's been a great pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much.
Will you accept God's invitation to a year of unhurried living? I would encourage you to check the links under this video for their resources at Unhurried Living and the book, A Year of Slowing Down, Daily Devotions for Unhurried Living. If there is a desire in your soul to be more like Jesus is calling you to become the person he wants you to be, you're not going to get there by just trying harder. But this journey is one that this book will help you with, and the other resources from Unhurried Living. Give Jesus a chance at your spiritual formation. Follow his invitation, not to just a one moment, but a life of this becoming and the goodness that comes from that. Thank you for watching this episode. I would love to hear from you. You can check our website, drcarolministries.com, and leave a confidential message for me on our contact page if you would like. I'd love also to see any comments from you below this video. Subscribe to our channel so that you get the regular material that we put here, usually once a week. I know that will be a blessing for you. Thank you again for being here, and until next time, may God bless you.